Hello and welcome to my channel. Hi, I'm Wendy J. Haney, and today I'm going to show you how to make this very simple pine tree block. It is an 8-inch finished block. I'm actually working on a quilt that is going to be used for a charity later this year, Patriotic Pick. It's an organization fundraiser that Jill Wagner and her husband do in September in Tellico Plains, Tennessee, and I'm working on a quilt for it. One of the blocks is a pine tree block, and I thought, hey, I think you might need this pine tree block to go in a quilt with that cardinal block we did a few months ago. So I thought I would show you how to make this, since it's such a perfect size and could be used in a lot of places. It's pretty simple. You're going to need a background fabric, fabric for your tree, and fabric for your trunk. So what do we need? From the background, you need two pieces of 2.5 by 4.5, 2 pieces 2.5 by 3.5, 2 pieces 2.5-inch square, and 2 pieces 2-inch by 4-inch. From the tree trunk, you need a 2.5 by 1.5-inch piece, and you only need one. For the tree, you're going to need 1 piece of each size. 2.5, 2.5 by 8.5, 2.5 by 6.5, whoops, 6.5, I had them laid out funny, and 2.5 by 4.5. This is what you need to make a single tree block. And then from your tools, obviously you need your cutting mat, your rotary cutter. I find that my Omni Grid, what is this, a 6.5-inch ruler is just a nice size to play with. We're going to need a diagonal line on that because part of this process is drawing 90-degree angles on 90-degree. Anyway, an angle. 90-degree angle on your fabric to get the angle for the tree. And then I'm using an 8.5-inch square to make sure I've got my strips 8.5-inch wide and everything is going to square up perfectly because this one is for somebody that I want them to really enjoy it and have it come out looking really, really nicely. So I'm extra careful. And then a marking pen. I'm having to use a friction clicker. I do believe, and then your general pins and things like that. Okay, let's get started because this is really going to go quickly. What I've done is put my piles together because this is how we're going to work with them. We're going to work in 4 rows. Our top row, which has the 2.5 by 4.5-inch green and your 2.5 by 4.5-inch background. The middle is your 6.5 by 2.5-inch green and 2 of your 2.5 by 3.5, and we're going to set that aside. Your other piece is your 2.5 by 8.5-inch green and your 2.5-inch squares for your bottom of your tree, and then your tree trunk is your 2.5 by 4 and your 2.5 by 1.5-inch brown. So we're going to set those aside. So if you put those together in that way, it'll make working with this very easily, especially if you're making more than one. I need, 16 of them or something. The first thing you're going to do is do this and take your background. And I apologize, I am working with batiks. So both sides of the fabrics are the same color. These are all Hoffman batiks. I have no idea what the green color that is because, well, it came from my stash. I like it. It worked for my tree. This is your Hoffman Bally 1895, I think it's 701. It's called Ice. Very hard to find. I just ordered another yard on Etsy because you can't get it anywhere. And then your brown, I'm pretty sure it's kind of the same 1895 Hoffman Bally. It's a brown. Once again, came out of my stash. Anyway, I am addicted to those Hoffman Bally fabrics and I really wish I could find more of them. Anyway, I digress. So in this case, you're going to be marking on, in this case, the top, because what we're going to do is we're going to put the green behind it. we're going to put your top on the top, and we want an angle from here to here. So since we have right sides together, these are right sides together, you're going to mark on the back of your background fabric. So I have my 90 degree angle. Yes, it's 90 degree, not 45 degree. I have my little clicker marker, and up here. And what I found is I don't put my ruler exactly in the corner because I need space for my marking. My pen has a width to it. And if I put it all the way over here, my line actually ends up above that corner. So keep that in mind in order for accuracy. So I always mark my corner first and go, do I have it right? Yes, I do. Okay. We're going to mark that. Or take this, put it on top, matching your edges carefully. Okay, now you are going to sew on the line. Unlike half square triangles and all sorts of other things we've been doing lately, where we've stitched on one side of the line or other, this one you're stitching on the line. My machine, I always shift my needle to get a better 1/4 inch seam. So now's the time for me to shift that back into the middle so my line of my foot is the center, because I'm going to do a lot of these stitching on the line. So I always like to pin. I pin on the edges so I don't have to worry about the foot going over it. And then I fold it over and go, okay, good. I'm not kitty wampus and that back is showing through. Now we're going to go and stitch on that line. Well, I should have used darker thread so you could see it, but I will take a picture and Kevin will post it there. I have stitched my on the line and I pressed it so my line has disappeared. What we're going to do now is trim off this triangle side. Make sure you trim the correct side. We're going to trim off that triangle. These make great leaders. Then you're going to open it up and you're going to press it to the tree side, which is our darker fabric. Okay, there we go. And I would highly suggest you don't just finger press, that you take it to the ironing board and press it. I have already done that with this one. Now, this is our top of our tree, so we need more background over here. Take your second piece of 2.5 by 4.5, and what we're going to do is right sides up, right sides down, and we're going to stitch this here. So that means this time our diagonal needs to go this way. This is the easiest way to remember without complicated instructions, is just, oh, yeah, well, I have to put it there because that way when we open it up, we're good. Okay, so we're going to take that, and I know the angle needs to go this way. Well, sometimes I get myself all kitty wampus with my ruler. Yep, and I'm going to do it this way. Sorry, people. I'm flipping that around. We're going to get our diagonal drawn. Okay, there we go. You're going to put it up here in this corner, making sure your line here should hit the corner of the corner down here of your tree fabric. So as you're placing everything together, that placement should work. Pin that, stitch on the line again. Okay? Come back. Once again, you're going to trim a 1/4 inch there off the corner. And then take it to the ironing board and press to the inside, to your tree. And there we go. We now have a top of your tree. And what I've been doing is just double checking. I'm taking my 8.5 inch ruler and go, okay, Are we on our size? Do I need to adjust my seam? We're good. I got an 8.5 inch by 2.5 inch top of my tree. Okay, now we're going to go and grab your, make sure I'm grabbing the right one. Your green 2.5 by 6.5 and your background 2.5 by 3.5. And in this case, you're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our background fabric, and I lost my little ruler, there we go, and we're going to draw a 90-degree angle on that, and put your tree underneath it. Put this background fabric on the top of it, and you're going to stitch on your line. Now that you have that one stitched, I'm guessing you know what we're going to do next. You're going to take the other background 2.5 by 3.5 piece fabric, and you're going to put it over here. Yep, right here. And just like the other one, this time you're going to draw your diagonal upper left, lower right. I usually just set the fabric on my tree fabric so I know the positioning of it, and then bring my ruler up the 90-degree angle on the left-hand side, and I can easily then draw my line. So we can do that. Over here, since you've already sewn that piece, what you're going to do is you're going to cut, wow, I'm wobbly today, 1/4 inch away from the seam, lop off that triangle, and whoops, you're going to press this to the tree. You can do your other side. And here I have that other side done. And we're going to come and trim off our corner and press to the tree. And now we have our middle tree. And as I said, I'm doing a little bit of validation, so I'm going to throw my 8.5 inch ruler on here and go, yep, I'm looking good on my width. As you noticed on this one, these seams don't overlap. Therefore, unlike our first row, where we have a point and these overlap, so you can't stitch these at the same time. In our second and third rows, it's very easy to mark and do these at the same time because they don't overlap. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go mark a whole bunch of these, get them, pin them, and I'm gonna take them to the sewing machine and go just stitch them all, chain piece them. This one, well, we'll have to do those separately. Now on to row 3 of the tree. Row 3 is a 2.5 by 8.5 piece of your tree and 2 2.5 inch squares. Yep, you guessed it. In this case, it's pretty easy for you to visualize because you're going to put your background on top of your tree fabric, and we want them to angle from the top middle to the lower outside. So yep, you guessed it. Let's see, I'm gonna do this one because my ruler is positioned that way. We're going to mark that one. And this one we want this way. I know, I get it, little. Go make sure I have room for my, okay. You're going to pin those on there and take them to the sewing machine and stitch on the line. Once again, row 3 of your tree. You can do this all at the same time because nothing overlaps. And you end up with this. We lop off our corners. And you're going to press to the inside. Press to your darker color as normal, which in this case is your tree. Oops, there we go. Okay, so now we have our bottom and we've got our middle. I don't have these fully pressed yet. And we have a top. There we go. All of those should be 2.5 by 8.5. The other really sweet thing that I like about this method for this block, there are no matching seams, no complications of anything. Biggest thing is, as you're working with each of these strips, make sure they end up 2.5 by 8.5, and everything will look good and it will line up. Okay, the bottom, that's where your little tree trunk, your 2.5 by 1.5, and your 2.5 by 4.5. Easy peasy. You're going to stitch your little tree trunk there, open it up, stitch your little tree trunk there, open it up, and you're going to have an 8.5 by 2.5 inch strip for the bottom. Now we have our 4 rows of our tree. We finished our tree, the tree trunk, gap in word there, and I press to the inside. So everything on these is pressed to the inside, which is your darker fabric. Note to self, all of these we were stitching on a line. So as I mentioned, I keep my needle in the center position for that. When I'm stitching a 1/4 inch seam, I adjust my needle position slightly so I can use the edge of my foot for my 1/4 inch seam. I just find I get a much cleaner 1/4 inch, scant 1/4 inch seam, and my things turn out better. Well, when you get to doing the last row, which is your tree trunk, switch your needle position if you need to. Oops, had to get the seam ripper out. So do that, because then everything else you're going to be sewing your 1/4 inch. So put your top 2 rows together, your bottom 2 rows together, position those, and stitch a 1/4 inch seam. There we go. There we go. And you're going to press those to the bottom. Press everything down. So now you have a set of 2, and you guessed it, put the last pairs together and stitch your 1/4 inch seam. And then, voila, you have an 8.5 inch unfinished tree block and no matching seams. Now, my pattern is going to have these lined up row, 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 one right after the other. Depending on the size of my panel, I realized the pattern's going to have me trim down the panel, I thought, much smaller than I was anticipating. I'm like, oh, I don't want to lose that much by panel. So I may opt to add a 1/2 inch strip of the backing between my trees, therefore stretching things out a little. Just gives you an idea of, what you can do when you're playing with things when you're working with a panel. Also, as you're working with these, make sure as you get close to the end of whether it's your corners or the end when you're sewing your tree trunk, keep hold of that fabric and don't let it shift at the very bottom. I'm notorious for that, of not keeping an eye on that and holding it so that it maintains that 1/4 inch seam or ends up exactly in the corner like I want. It will shift and all of a sudden, oh, got a little fatter at the bottom end because I didn't keep hold of it. If you do that, you'll end up with a much better job. And oops, look at there, I have a seam that I ended up pressing the wrong direction. Oh well, not the end of the world because none of the seams overlap. So there you have it. Now you have an evergreen tree that your cardinal can sit on. Yeah, sit in, on. Anyway, it could make a great combination quilt. There you have it, a simple evergreen tree quilt block. Take care and thank you so much for watching.